Right, let's move on to our next panel discussion, which is quite interesting, but also affects us a lot, the challenges of climate change are acute in the Eastern Mediterranean, a hotspot of rising temperatures. Climate change prompts collaboration and interconnectivity, yet the region is unconnected and steeped in conflict. How do young people see the challenges of climate change and what needs to be done? We compare attitudes and activism among young people in Greece and Cyprus based on original fieldwork research. What do they think needs to be done? How do politics need to change? And what might result from giving youth a stronger voice on this key agenda for the future? ELIAMEP and the Hellenic Observatory bring together experts to help us understand what may change. Give a warm welcome to Cleopatra Kitti, ELIAMEP Senior Policy Advisor, Lydia Avrami, ELIAMEP Research Fellow, Othon Kaminaris, ELIAMEP Junior Research Fellow, Spiros Spirou, Professor of Anthropology, European University of Cyprus, Eleni Theodorou, Associate Professor, European University of Cyprus, and Kevin Featherstone, Hellenic Observatory Director. Eleftherios Venizelos, Professor of Contemporary Greek Studies and Professor of European Politics, will moderate.
Thank you very much indeed. Let me thank the organizers of the forum for such an interesting program and the opportunity to discuss with colleagues an important topic. I'm particularly pleased that this panel is a collaboration between ELIAMEP in Athens and the Hellenic Observatory at the London School of Economics, the LSE. We're here to discuss an important issue, climate change, in the specific context of the responses of young people and youth activism in both Greece and Cyprus. Climate change presents us with a number of paradoxes. Let me mention two. Firstly, by definition, it's an existential issue that should connect all of us across the globe and in any particular region. But in reality, it seems to divide us. It divides us in our assessments of the nature of climate change and the actions that we should be taking. And it hasn't overcome all divisions. Secondly, climate change is quintessentially an issue of intergenerational justice. Yet we see youth protests contrasting with a discourse that naturalizes climate change on the part of many older voters and established politicians. So what's the context for action on climate change, particularly here in the Eastern Mediterranean? And how are young people responding? I'm delighted to introduce our panels to structure the discussion. First of all, we have my good friend Cleopatra Kitti. Secondly, joining us from Athens, we have Lydia Avrami and Othon Kaminaris. Here, joining me on stage is Spiros Spirou and Eleni Theodorou. Lydia and Othon will be talking about a project based on Greece from ELIAMEP, and Spiros and Eleni will be talking about a project based in Cyprus, supported by the LSE's Hellenic Observatory. We look forward to the discussion. Perhaps if there's time, we can invite your questions from the audience. But to get us underway in terms of establishing the context for our discussion, I'm going to ask Cleopatra to begin. Cleopatra.
Thank you, Kevin. It's good to be together again. I'm here as a team member or a senior policy advisor of the Mediterranean program of ELIAMEP. Our program, if I may just take a second to say that it looks specifically at the interconnectivity or the positive agenda of the region. Climate change is an issue that divides and unites, as you very rightly said, and it's a very big part of our program, how we mitigate climate change to address conflict, but also create the synergies for collaboration. So let me just say a few thoughts to frame the discussion. So climate change, we live it now. I mean, we feel it. It's an undisputed reality. The Mediterranean is a global hotspot of rising temperatures. The recent Union for the Mediterranean report cites that the region warms 20% faster than any other region of the world, which means that by 2040, it says, the region will face an extreme increase of temperatures by 2.2 degrees Celsius. So what does that mean? Rising temperatures have implication on access to resources, to clean water, and to food production, which create migration and cause for conflict. Another fact that we forget to assess is that the Mediterranean is home to 500 million people, which is as big as the European Union internal market, but it is the least connected region in the world. So if you think how Southeast Asia is interconnected to China, or how North America is interconnected to South America, the Mediterranean is Europe's front line to Africa, but it's the least connected on either side, which means it becomes this porous border of either conflict or migration outcomes. So what we see is that we need a Mediterranean Green Marshall Plan, where we build that capacity of collaboration and problem solving. I had three sort of recommendations on how we might be looking at collaboration. One angle rests on deploying funds to build the infrastructure for solar and wind energy. We are, in Southern Europe at least, looking to see how we can tap EU infrastructure funds to build more interconnectors. The East Mediterranean is an emerging market in possibly energy, but we're not there yet. So how do we build the institutions to govern shared resources is one, whether it's renewables or gas. The Europeans look at the Scandinavian Nord Pool model. The Europeans have built the Net Pool model. Cyprus or the East Med could look to see how we can replicate that model of institutions, infrastructure, resources. The other angle rests on shared capabilities in anticipating climate change, whether it's fires or floods or food shortage or weather extremities, which don't recognize borders, or water pollution, or we explore in East Med, we might have gas or oil leaks. So how do we deal with this if we don't have the collaborative institutions and structures? And the third angle is capacity building. So how we learn together, by looking at other regions, not just learning amongst ourselves, but how we learn from other regions together, and build our own regional capacity, respecting the peculiarities or particularities of our region. So education, but not just amongst youth, amongst everybody, amongst society, amongst policymakers, amongst business. So building that capacity. I conclude with that and say that climate change is unstoppable, and unless we realize that what worked in the past will not work for today or tomorrow, and that the generations that are today shaping the future for tomorrow have more merit to have a say than what we have done for the past. So
thank you, Cleopatra, very much. That sets a challenging context. Let me pass then to Athens and to Lydia and Orthon. Lydia.
Thank you, Professor. May I share my presentation? Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. We're just waiting for the presentation to come on screen.
I can do that. Okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry, but I'm disabled to share screen. I mean the host disabled participants.
Okay. Hopefully my colleagues behind us can enable you to share the screen.
Okay.
Recording stopped.
Okay, thank you. I hope that now you can see our common presentation with Orthon Kaminiaris.
We can, thank you.
Great. So our presentation has to do with Arsinoi project. Arsinoi project and the youth assemblies on climate change that organized by ELIAMEP the previous year and will organize the next 3 years in Athens. It is a 4-year project. It is funded by the European Commission, coordinated by the University of Thessaly. We are 41 partners from all over Europe. And this project includes both research and educational actions, activities, so as to develop pathways to resilience and innovative climate change measures and policy proposals and solutions across Europe. So ELIAMEP, as a partner of this consortium, organized 2 youth assembly simulations with the participation of high school and university students, and 1 training for trainers seminar with the participation of secondary school teachers. We follow a methodology which is based on bottom-up and community-based approach. More specifically, we provided scientific knowledge and the necessary background tailored to the needs of the target group. So they can make research on their own, map stakeholders and existing policies, identify which are the local environmental problems and vulnerabilities, and then meet together, discuss and shape local green deals at regional level. The aims of these activities shortly were to provide scientific knowledge, but mainly to foster dialogue and social consensus among youth, offering the young people the chance to gain first-hand experience on participatory decision-making processes. And we provided all the necessary theoretical tools and practical instructions so as these simulation techniques can be applied into the secondary school education. The first youth assembly is held on May. It should be noted that we encourage the participation of students from different areas of Attica region with different socioeconomic status and exposure to climate change risk. Therefore, we could capture the different perceptions, the varied perceptions and experiences regarding climate change impacts and related policies. The participants have the opportunity to participate in activities, preparatory activities, such as the measurement of carbon footprint, so as to understand how they contribute to climate change. And we encourage all the schools to create environmental groups so as to identify and map environmental problems, risk, vulnerabilities at the local level. So the climate policy proposals capture the consensus of youth in Athens, and now will be presented shortly by Othon Kaminiaris.
Thank you very much, Lydia. Let me pick up things from where you left them off and present you the green deals that the two youth assemblies produced. May I have the next slide, please? So, as Lydia already told you, we had a variety of backgrounds in terms of climate change exposure, climate change risk exposure. So it was very encouraging that both the university students and the high school students identified and acknowledged common challenges. These are the categories, the axes around which the two youth assemblies revolved. And as you can see, they are pretty much the same. We have, for example, a perfect overlap with transport and recycling, or we have different aspects of the same issues in energy transition and green buildings, for example, or the weather conditions and more specific aspects, the fire and flood protection. And the only difference is education that stands out in the high school students' text. And in order to further disseminate the results of the project, we sent them to local authorities in Athens. So we had to group all the measures and the recommendations produced by the students. So we came up with these 5 pillars: climate neutrality, waste management, the green regeneration, resilience, and education. Now let's see some of the specific measures. Of course, they are indicative because in just 4 days, the students produced around 15 pages of recommendations and measures. So we had to, to pick some of them and present. You see, in the energy transition, the concept revolved around energy autonomy and self-efficiency, especially after the invasion of Russia and Ukraine. So some of the policy proposals were the installation of small-scale renewable energy projects, such as ground and floating solar parks, or the establishment of energy communities for producing our own energy. Also in the green buildings, we had some more larger scale interventions, such as the improvement of the energy efficiency of buildings and the installations of photovoltaic panels on rooftops. And in the transport sectors, we had some pretty smart ideas, like installing smart lamps for lighting public spaces, or installing mini photovoltaic panels on traffic lights in order for them to not to draw energy from the grid lines. In the waste management, the students proposed a holistic approach and an integrated waste management system with some very innovative ideas for remunerative programs for recycling. For example, a Pay As I Pollute is a program that they presented for offsetting pollution and recycling with municipal fees. Or, for example, the last bullet is Find My Bin, which is a proposal for the creation of an application for our smartphones for finding the nearest dumpsters, depending on the material that we want to dispose. In the green regenerations, the students consider it necessary to remodel outdoor public spaces in order to create more green spaces. And for this purpose, the provision of financial incentives to citizens for creating small gardens, what we call pocket parks, and green rooftops, as well as the expropriation of unused or abandoned places for the creation of parks, were some of the solutions that they proposed. In terms of resilience to the impacts of the climate change and adaptation measures, they propose that we have to strengthen our services and infrastructure in general, such as the national fire services. So you see that the first recommendation, for example, is to install smart sensors on trees in forests for alerting the fire services in cases of fire and for timely intervention, or the use of innovative materials in the construction sector. Also, the operation of public spaces to accommodate homeless people and stray animals in periods of adverse weather conditions, or the creation of flood prevention works and the systematic cleaning of streams and debris. And of course, in Athens especially, the urban planning is in many places problematic, so we have to amend it as well. Lastly, in terms of education, they proposed the introduction of environmental awareness programs and projects in school curricula that they're completely absent right now. And for example, measures for reducing waste by reusing the school books that are in good condition and passing them from student to student instead of each student keeping their own. So these were some of the measures that they proposed, which were very innovative and with a good perspective towards all these issues that, as I already said, capture the sectors that we need to draw our attention on, as they are the common challenges that are acknowledged by the youth of Athens. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Orthon, very much indeed. It's a fascinating fieldwork, which has included talking to students at different levels of education, but also giving training seminars for teachers as to how to introduce climate change into the school curriculum. So a fascinating case of how students and teachers are responding in the Attica region. Let's shift geographically to Cyprus, and for a project which also involves fieldwork, can I invite Eleni and Spiros to speak?
Please allow me to move to the front of the stage.
Certainly, yes.
I'll be using a presentation. Thank you. Hello. So we'll be sharing parts of our study, Spiros and I, that took place in Cyprus. It was a qualitative project that was conducted between January 2020 and May 2021 on youth activism for climate change through the case study of Youth for Climate Cyprus. It was funded by the A.G. Levendis Foundation and the Hellenic Observatory of the London School of Economics and Political Science. Youth for Sea, which was the center of the study, is a grassroots youth movement set up in 2019, run and organized by young people in Cyprus with the aim of fighting against climate change. It was inspired by the work of Greta Thunberg, and it also has affiliations with the Fridays for Future movement. So, but the main purpose of the study was to explore how young people made meaning of their activism and the ways and forms in which they self-organized and operated. They say that their main aim was to raise awareness and exert pressure on politicians and the adult-led society, seeing themselves as catalysts for change. Cleopatra also mentioned that the burden of the climate change falls on the youth, and this is pretty much what the youth of our study felt. They conceptualized the issue as an existential issue that disproportionately affects their generation as well as future generations. They attributed the climate crisis to human-induced change that is fueled by a drive to maximize profit, the results of prevalence of a consumerist society, the results of the works of the capitalist economic system, and also as the outcome of the inaction of politicians on a global as well as a national level. And they also frame it as an intergenerational issue, but we can come back to that later in the discussion. So how did they go about their activism? They engaged in different forms of social activism, including street protests, role-playing or silent protests, awareness-raising campaigns, collecting and sharing data, scientific data through social media, organizing environmental actions such as beach cleaning expeditions. But they also engaged in everyday activism through adopting more eco-friendly lifestyles, as well as striking conversations with friends and family members regarding the issue. They made a conscious effort to localize their activism on climate change, focusing on environmental issues that are prevalent in Cyprus and the region. For example, they used slogans that referred to the gas drilling in Cyprus, and they acknowledged the need that they had to adapt their strategies to the local context. So what are the implications of this study? What really became prevalent is that this activism of young people on this issue created a space, and at the same time it also highlighted the lack of such spaces for legitimizing young people's voices and for allowing them to draw attention to social and political issues that may have been silenced by adult narratives. For example, it is very prevalent to hear referring to climate change as a natural phenomenon that occurs anyway. And that seems to silence discussions around human-induced climate change. It also raised questions of democratic participation. Youth were very vocal against ageist policies and structures that prevented them from being equal participants in public life, and also opened up questions for cross and intergenerational allyship as well. And even though the effectiveness of their action remains an open question, the emergence of such local youth activist movements points to the potential of youth social movements as global and local alliances forge. And I think with that, we conclude and we open it up for discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So we have the geopolitical context, the situation of the region, and we have two great empirical studies, one based in Athens. It would be nice if we can see our colleagues again in Athens on screen, and one here in Cyprus. I wonder if I could kick us off by asking questions to each of you in turn. There are themes here in terms of the scope for change, for policy change, and as Cleopatra mentioned, there's themes here in terms of capacity and constraints. And I thought Cleopatra was great in telling us about the significance of the issue and the constraints. Let me begin by just pushing you a little further, if I may, in terms of thinking about the future and your optimism, pessimism. Specifically, you had this great idea that the magnitude of climate change in the region would logically prompt something like a green Marshall Plan. But also at the same time, you emphasized the lack of institutions to support that kind of collaboration. So, great idea. There's a capacity issue, and perhaps there's a funding issue. Who would finance this? Looking ahead 10 years plus, could you see reasons for optimism that there could be some kind of breakthrough in terms of regional collaboration in this respect?
Yeah, I mean, there are initial efforts. If we look at the East Mediterranean Gas Forum,
yeah,
which is the beginning of an institutional forum where countries of the region collaborate to explore or share gas resources or eventually trade and interconnect. So that's the optimistic side. I think from the youth side, I would really like to see more engagement in working together in the ways they know how to work together. I mean, technology doesn't know borders, like climate change doesn't know borders. So there, you know, even if it's from small things of, you know, projects of collecting waste across the shores of the littoral cities of the Mediterranean. Whether this is a marine project or a civil society project, it's a one thing. And I know we have an NGO, Kitti, in Cyprus that has done a project that worked across the shores of Cyprus, north and south and east and west, that brought this effort together. So there are glimpses of optimism and collaboration where there is imagination and leadership and mobilization. We need more of that.
Thanks. It links very nicely, Cleopatra, to what I was wondering about Spiros and Eleni's fascinating projects here in Cyprus. As Cleopatra says, if change is going to come about, it's civic action, it's particular movements. You've mentioned the youth movement for climate change as a campaign organization. Do you see evidence so far that this kind of agenda, this kind of campaign, is building solidarity between the two communities of Cyprus?
We have not seen evidence of that. What we see is young people actively trying to establish intergenerational solidarity. They extend an invitation to older generations, which they partly see as responsible for what we have today, and they invite them to join forces with them.
Sorry, Spiro, I'm not quite sure that the sound is picking you up. Can everyone hear, Spiros?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I apologize.
So there, you know,
Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So we do know that young people actively try to establish that kind of solidarity with older generations because it's part of their agenda. Now, at the same time, this is a youth movement, so they want to retain some of their identity as young people who have something different to say and who normally would not participate in formal political processes. So a lot of them, at least the underage ones, do not have the right to vote. So the only way they can express their political will is through participation in these social movements. So this raises, I mean, given also the theme of the forum, a larger question about the political participation of young people in decision-making that will affect their lives more than perhaps our generation. So even though we're talking about climate change, I think the issue is much bigger and we need to find ways to address it here in Cyprus. It's happening everywhere, of course. It's not just a problem here in Cyprus, but we need to find ways to include young people in decision-making processes, especially for crises like this, which, as you said, Kevin, is of existential proportions. It's not just any crisis.
Yes.
And young people have a lot at stake, and they do have a very elaborate vision and a very different vision than previous generations about what a sustainable world would look like, which is less anthropocentric, more open to other species and so on, and the survival of the planet, something which, you know, requires quite a bit of rethinking by all of us.
And it's also an agenda that links youth activism here in Cyprus with an international movement. You emphasize that the organization you focused on, Youth for Climate Action in Cyprus, was stimulated by the activities of people like Greta Thunberg, etc. There won't be many issues which link so strongly domestic youth activism and an international network. Is this important?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if Eleni wants to, I think it helps Cyprus become less self-centered. I mean, obviously there are local realities here, and climate change affects us locally, and we were just talking in the corridor about dust storms and all these new phenomena that we're experiencing, rising temperatures, the gradual desertification of the island, and so on. So there are local realities, but the issues are, of course, global. And to the extent that young people are looking outwards to collaborate with others from other countries, other places, I think it's also a sign that young people are quite mature in their understanding of a future that is not just about us, just about Cyprus. And I think that's to be supported and embraced in many ways.
Okay, thanks. I wonder if I can now ask questions to Lydia and Othon in Athens. I thought what was very interesting about your research was that you speak very explicitly about intergenerational justice, and your fieldwork involved talking to teachers and training teachers for how to introduce climate change into the curriculum, but it also involved lots of interviews with students, school pupils directly. I wonder what kind of contrasts or criticisms you might have picked up between one group as opposed to the other. In other words, did you pick up a sense of criticism, distance from, on the part of school students from their teachers on these kind of issues?
Thank you for the question. Indeed, it's very interesting because this is what we had in our mind when we organized both activities, I mean, for students and for teachers. So the teachers highlighted the social and the socioeconomic inequalities and how these inequalities, even within Attica region, may vary the exposure of students and citizens in general to climate change impact. So we see that they have extremely different perceptions and positions against climate change and how we can deal with this issue. One of the main issues raised from our discussion with teachers and from students, this is important, is their low trust to the local authorities, not only to the central government, but also to the local authorities, that, okay, we can propose specific measures, what local authorities can do so as to deal with the climate change risks, and if these policies will be efficient in practice. So I think that until now, it remains a key challenge, the implementation. I mean, how citizens understand the outcomes of the policies implemented in Greece in the field of climate change, and how they experience the outcome of these initiatives. I mean, the low trust to public authorities and involved stakeholders is the main issue and the main barrier, so as to give a motivation to the citizens and the youth to be more active in this field. Also, do you want to?
Yeah, I wanted to add a dimension to this, picked up from the teachers and the students, was that teachers mainly had in mind that they would come, they would be trained, and then they would pass on some knowledge to the students in order for them to act and be the one that will bring change. And the students were also feeling more engaged and indeed be the ones that will bring the change. So there was this difference between them, and I wanted to say that to me it was a very positive point, because in Greece at least we have a clear lack of participation of youth people, of young people in general in decision-making processes. So that was our initial goal while coming up with the idea of youth assemblies, that they need to shape the decisions and the circumstances that they'll be called upon to live in the next years. So you cannot plan tackling climate change without the inclusion of the youth. And they seem to be very aware of it. For example, in older empirical researches, we see that many people don't change their behavior and don't have a pro-environmental behavior because they feel that individuals cannot do many things. That's what that's fatalism. That's what they call it.
Okay.
And I think that, young people now feel more enabled to bring change and more capable of doing things. And, they are engaged in these processes. So I think that's very positive.
Okay, thanks, Orthan. I'm afraid we're out of time. The clock in front of me is telling me that I've chaired the time very poorly, but there's many questions we could have pursued. But you've finished the discussion on a positive note here in terms of a sense of empowerment, a new agenda, potentially opening up new opportunities for the future. It's a big subject, but thank you to each of our panelists for addressing the key issues, setting it in context, reporting on two really interesting research projects, which allows us to contrast Greece and Cyprus. So can you thank our panelists very much indeed?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.